Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm the co-owner and managing director with Impetus Digital. And for those of you who don't know what Impetus Digital is, we have curated and developed some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration tools for life science companies across the globe. We've been around for 11 years, and we help people with bringing their physicians, payers, patients, allied healthcare providers together in a virtual place to create, to collaborate, and to share ideas. And even with post-COVID, we found a lot of people have needed to virtualize their meetings, POA rollouts, internal meetings, and this has been a huge, huge help for a lot of companies. At Impetus Digital, we believe that everything starts with a conversation. All great ideas start with a conversation. It's really the premise and the purpose behind these fireside chats with people like Max and other innovative, creative people as well. When we start putting more ideas out there, we can put out these big, hairy, audacious goals. We can start to move the needle and move the agenda forward on positively disrupting healthcare. So again, it's the reason behind this webinar series, and we're looking forward to dissecting some new concepts and inspiring this ecosystem of entrepreneurs. For those of you who also know me, I'm the Toronto lead for the transformative technology community. And as you know, this is a community and an ecosystem of startups and small businesses and people who are very, very entrenched in the idea of human wellness, flourishing, and well-being. And we are looking forward as a community of affecting the lives of 1 billion people by the year 2030 by using some of these great exponential technologies. So today I'm very pleased to have Max Newlon with me from BrainCo. He is currently the US president of BrainCo. This is a company that helps create solutions for people with attention deficiencies. So I know that nowadays with all of us with phones, we all have attention deficiencies. So how do we get more focus? So he's very interested in improving attention abilities for people like you and I. So beyond attention training, his technologies does also have the ability and the potential to help people with different cognitive issues, including anxiety, depression, and executing other sorts of functioning deficiencies. So Max actually has a really interesting background, and I was very intrigued by it. And one of the reasons I got in touch with him in the first place, he graduated with a master's at Harvard, and he was doing a lot of research there that was studying ego development and workplace engagement, where he was designing novel math curriculums that were incorporated to raise awareness of social issues. He also worked as a clinical research coordinator at the Massachusetts General Hospital, where he managed and organized a $1 million year-long project. And there he was aligning, designing and investigating cognitive enhancement in high-performing individuals before going off to constructing a REDCap database, where he started tracking clinical implications of deep brain stimulation surgery as a clinical research assistant at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. So he's been leveraging the skills that he has picked up while working as a research associate at the Authentic Leadership Institute at Harvard, where he evaluated trends in executive education, authentic leadership, and purpose-driven organizations. And then now, as you know, he's the US president at BrainCo. So all of this is culminated in the perfect storm for him to lead something really pivotal globally. So we're really happy to have you here, Max. What a great background. Thank you for joining us today.
No, thanks, Natalie. I'm really excited for today.
That's awesome. So maybe we'll just kind of get started on that. I kind of gave that really big bio and brief on you, but why don't you tell us a little bit about why you were so perfectly framed, and as we all know, when you probably got into a meditative state, allowed the perfect storm to come your way to be leading something that was such a perfect fit for you. How did you get there, and why did you know that BrainCo was the company for you?
That's a really great question. I think there are two trajectories that kind of came together. One was me concentrating on the things in life that I really enjoy, which is meditation and personal growth and thinking about how people change over the course of their lives. And then the other one is this unhealthy obsession with how do I find something that is really the epitome of what I want to be doing. So I spent a lot of my time, and I still do spend quite a bit of my time thinking about how do I pull together what I'm passionate about in a way that can be of service to other people. So I think each step along the way, there was definitely a little bit of luck and some chance encounters. And then also thinking about what is this kind of trajectory I want to be on. And through kind of a sequence of events, I was able and afforded some really interesting opportunities to work with some really great people, work in some really interesting industries that have now come together in what we're doing at BrainCo around how people develop, how we can help people reduce stress, how we can help people kind of unlock these innate qualities that we all have.
I think that's awesome. And I think this is really interesting about you talking about the formidable task of constantly trying to find that balance. And I believe that this is probably something all of us, if not most of us, have been toying with during this COVID-19 pandemic. Many people here might have had to look at ways of repivoting their businesses or reconsidering their entire business model. So this idea about finding that balance about what you're truly passionate about and providing value to external users and customers is so absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm.
So as you tackle that issue, what are some of the obstacles that you either currently find yourself in or have found yourself in trying to find that balance? Why is it sometimes a challenge to find that balance?
So I can speak on it from two levels. One is the personal level and one is the company level. From a personal level, I think that the word balance is something you just said, which is really important. So I was kind of just joking around a little bit with that self-deprecating humor that it's kind of this unhealthy obsession that I'm really trying to figure this thing out. But what's occurred to me in the space that we all have during quarantine is to maybe soften that edge of me really trying to find that perfect solution. And I think through relaxing a little bit more and taking some time during quarantine to, spend some more time in nature, spend some more time with my family, other qualities start to emerge that I think fulfill what we're looking for, which is a well-rounded life, a purposeful life, and a way for us to use the skills and talents that we have in a meaningful way. So from the personal side, I think it's a balance between pursuing that refinement of how you want to be contributing to the world, and also making sure that you're balancing that with just kind of some fun and some relaxation to make sure you don't take that too seriously.
Right.
Business side, what we did, and this is kind of interesting and I think speaks to a lot of startups, is at the beginning of the company's journey, we tried to do a lot of different things. And the reason is, and one of the reasons that contributed to this is because our industry is new. This is one reason. And because the technology is what would be considered a platform technology, which means it has a core function, but that core function can be applied to so many different things. That kind of led us down this path of trying a lot of different applications. And during quarantine, something that's been happening, and it started before, but it certainly afforded us the opportunity during this time, is to kind of pull things in a little bit more, reduce the number of projects we're working on, and do some both quantitative and qualitative and intuitive analysis around where do we really want to be focusing? What is one category that's going to have a really big impact that our technology is really suited for? And what that's turned out to be is stress reduction and productivity. So how can we help people reduce stress, which applies to so many different types of people with all different types of conditions, and then also increase productivity so that people can accomplish the things that are important to them in their life.
So this is really an interesting pivot point or inflection point in this discussion, because as I was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of companies, a lot of people potentially around this virtual table today who are having to or have had to rethink their business model. So maybe you can sort of paint the picture for us, and we're going to revisit this as the pivot point, which was COVID-19. What did BrainCo look like, and what was its mandate? And there was a myriad of different products that you can find on your website. So what did that look like before? And then after we discuss that, we can talk about what it looks like now after the pandemic. So what were you offering as a company before COVID-19?
Sure. And I can give some context to what I mean by platform technology. So this is our first generation hardware. It's a headband that detects the electrical signals coming out of your brain. And then we have some machine learning and deep learning algorithms that take those signals, which are naturally occurring. And depending on your cognitive state, we can quantify different states of well-being, like stress, or different states of engagement. So am I really engaged in a conversation or with what I'm doing? But that's what I mean by a platform technology. You can take that data and do a lot with it. Before COVID, we had a really big focus on the education space. So how can we help people learn better by understanding what's going on during learning in different learning environments, either online or in person? And what that looks like is people who are learning are wearing the headband. So imagine a classroom full of kids and they're all wearing this headband, and the teacher is getting feedback, smart feedback, on what's engaging the students and what's not engaging the students, and starting to craft their lesson plans and refine how they engage their students, because we know that if you can increase engagement, then you're going to increase all different types of educational outcomes like test scores, but also we all know that when you're engaged in a conversation, it's obviously way more enjoyable, both for the person presenting. We all want our audience to be engaged, and also for the audience, if they're really engaged, it's going to be a deeper learning experience. So we were really heavily focused on the education space, and we had a couple different applications we were playing with. One was for attention training, one was for helping the teachers. But what we noticed was, even though the science was really supportive of what we were doing, we published a paper with MIT that showed how this technology can really significantly increase test scores and engagement in the brain. But there was a little bit of a disconnect between what people were ready for. That picture that I painted with the classroom full of students with the headband, it's not hard to think of Black Mirror, right? All these kids wearing this technology, especially it's new, it's a wearable, it goes on your head, it's not just on your wrist. So there was some schools that were really excited about this, that fit right away, and we were able to launch with them. But what we realized, and this was kind of the turning point, which is this technology fits in the education space. We know it works. The research backs it up. We have some early traction, but it's going to be an uphill battle. So what other applications can we produce that are going to have a similar, if not more significant impact on the world, but we're not going to face the same type of headwinds? And that's when we started to position a little bit more towards things like athletic training, so helping athletes improve their cognitive abilities. And then we loosened that definition a little bit more and figured out how to focus the product on this core value proposition of reducing stress and helping people get more done with less stress, and how that applies to the workplace, how that applies to people in their personal lives. It still applies to athletes, it still applies to schools, but we're not going to be pigeonholing ourselves just in the education market. So that was kind of the transition from education to this stress and productivity application.
So interesting segue into my question around post-COVID and why the thinking and the value proposition and your company positioning changed. So obviously, and I guess you could speak a little bit about this, is I'm curious about what has happened with your business model, with revenues, interest, engagement since the COVID-19 pandemic, and all of the news that we've been hearing around us of some of the impact it's had on people's mental health, like you're saying, stress levels. Tell us about how that's impacted BrainCo, and obviously your decision to pivot the company around that concept.
Yeah, I think it's really clear that a lot of people are experiencing higher levels of stress and anxiety because of COVID, because of the quarantine, etc. And our product is really well positioned to help people explore how they can move the needle in a quantifiable way, how they can track how their brain is changing over time, how they can learn from expert meditators, expert sports psychologists, different wellness experts, and have it all be trackable in this kind of gamified way. So the product positioning fits kind of where we are in this cultural moment. And the other interesting change that we've seen is, even in the education space, we have a partner who is developing a solution using this technology for distance learning. So there's been some adaptation in terms of the applications. We're aligning ourselves with this cultural moment. And from a business model point of view, we're certainly and kind of obviously dialing back a lot of the in-person outreach that we're doing, where before we were focusing a lot on different conference presentations, and boots on the ground sales tactics. We're finding different ways to reach our target audience through online advertising, working with key opinion leaders and social media influencers, and then our partners, because their business models are having to shift, they're finding new ways to use our technology too, which in some ways are an even better fit for what we're doing. So it's been our adaptation, and then as our partners are adapting, they're using our technology in a new way that we hadn't thought of as much before.
So you started your product profile with this focus calm.
Mhm.
And then you've actually started branching off into other areas, like you said, focus fit and focus now.
Mhm.
Are these really the same product with slight changes on the actual applications? Tell us a little bit about exactly how these work.
Sure. So the genesis was with Focus Now, and the value proposition was we were going to help students learn how to focus better, be more efficient while they're doing their homework, things like this. It also kind of simultaneously was applying to people with attention deficits, which we saw some good traction in. Then what we realized was, in this kind of similar vein of this uphill battle in education, was convincing the parent to buy a product for their child, or convincing the school to buy a product for the teacher to be used with the children. The decision maker was getting farther and farther apart from the end user.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought about, okay, who needs something like this? Who has a strong need for this type of mental training, but is the decision maker? And that's when we evolved the product into Focus Fit. And so we're working with Formula One athletes. We're working with different USA Olympic teams. We're working with a lot of elite level athletes. And then this latest iteration, which is where we're really focusing on now, is Focus Calm. So the lessons that we learned about attention, the lessons that we learned about peak performance from athletes, and now with this extra focus on relaxation and calming, we're able to kind of take the best from these products and put it into Focus Calm. And the really wonderful outcome, even though we're focusing on this market, is they still apply to the education space, right? Students still get stressed out. They still apply to athletes. They still need this type of cognitive training and relaxation training, which was really the core value proposition of Focus Fit anyways. So now we're going to start fading out Focus Now and Focus Fit, and really just offering this Focus Calm solution to simplify the development process, simplify the business models, and because it still delivers on those value propositions, the target demos that we were working with before aren't missing out.
Yeah, so that's a really wonderful lesson for all of us to learn, is that company journeys are a journey. There really is the arrival fallacy. It's a process of iteration and learning, and there is no failure. And it's just a great lesson to learn, is that things are going to get thrown in our way all the time. And it's how we leverage those opportunities to overcome them and to continue to build and foster these ideas into bigger and braver and bolder things. So one of the things I thought was really interesting is the evolution of how it eventually entrenches in the education space. And so one of the big controversies of today, emerging into the new normal, is what does learning mean? What is the education model? And as we start to think about things more and more in distance learning, and is learning all the time, do you have a philosophy around what the new education model looks like? And you were saying, influencing decision makers as opposed to the final user, which is the student. And the student can be a myriad of different things. It doesn't just have to be somebody under the age of 16. It's
Right.
these lifelong learners. So is there a way to encapsulate learning in a new way? And how do you frame what the new education model looks like moving forward?
I think it boils down to efficiency and personalization. So imagine being able to capture your brain's reaction to different types of learning methods. You probably have a sense of that, like while you're doing different like LinkedIn learnings or things like this, you probably feel like one of these is more engaging than the other. But imagine being able to have data that picks up on things that maybe we're not even aware of what creates or what attributes to more engaging learning. And we know more engaging learning is more effective learning. So the efficiency that we can create over time, we're talking about iteration. Imagine being able to iterate on an education content that really grabs people's attention and really helps those concepts sink in, and can also time the difficulty of concepts based on how much brain strain we're measuring in someone, and to dial it back so that we don't overwhelm people. or key it up if we're seeing that actually they're able to acquire a lot of information without a lot of effort. So this is the efficiency piece. And then also the end piece there ties into the personalization. So understanding how I'm learning is very different than how you're learning, is very different than how other people are learning. And being able to use this type of data to customize not only the content, but also the sequence that and the difficulty that we give people based on their individual experience. So the personalization and the efficiency, they're pretty closely tied together. But the outcome is going to be quicker learning, more enjoyable learning, more engaging learning, learning that sticks, learning that feels like it's built for you. And I think it's going to just take people on a journey that feels better and it feels like we're getting the outcomes that we want, as opposed to some older models where someone is giving the same presentation to everybody at the exact same time. Wouldn't it be great if it was built for you and it adapted for you? And I'm kind of hinting at a project that we haven't announced yet, but is coming in the next few months by the end of the year, where I think the world will be able to see in a pretty significant way what that might look like.
Right. No, absolutely, for sure. So I'm very interested in that, and I think there's a lot to be said about lifelong learning, and it's all really useful. So on that same note around the learning is you've actually started to work in schools in a variety of different ways, including the BrainCo STEM kit. Is that something that you're still focusing on as part of the learning journey? And where did this sort of DEXIS prosthetic kind of come into play into this overall or this overarching array of things that you're providing in the market?
Yeah, this is a really great story. So we were at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. I think it was 2016. And we had our headband and we were showing how it could control different things in your environment, you know, a light bulb, a humidifier. And we had this little robotic hand that when you focused, it would close. And when you relaxed your mind, it would open, just as a demo. And we had a gentleman come up to us who had a prosthetic hand, a robotic prosthetic hand, and he asked us if we could have our headband control the hand. And so we got to talking to him a little bit, and we learned that the hand cost him about $70,000. So we started to look into this possibility of the headband controlling real robotic hands for amputees, and the answer is no. It's way too complicated to have your brain signals control the robotic hand. But the same principles for understanding the electrical impulses coming out of the brain can be applied to understanding the electrical impulses that are coming out of people's muscles, which is how a lot of these prosthetics work. So we explored the space a little bit, and we figured out that we thought we could do a better job, and we were right. We've been able to develop a product that is at a lower price point, but has a higher functionality than what's currently on the market. And so we're working with the FDA to release this product for amputees by the end of the year. But it's a full medical device. So it's a full robotic hand that amputees can use. They have intuitive control over individual fingers, so they can move their hand just like you or I would move our hand. And a derivative of this project was to come back to that robotic hand, that little demo hand we had at CES. It's just like little 3D printed parts. And we had a summer camp where we had kids come in and learn about neuroscience, and we showed them the hand, and they like lost their minds over it. They thought it was super cool. So we started talking to some educators, and we learned that there's no educational kits that are so focused on a real application of robotics and STEM, or robotics and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we started to commercialize this little demo hand that we had, and now we sell the STEM kit, which is a educational version of the prosthetic hand, where students can learn about prosthetics, they learn about engineering, they learn about computer science and programming and coding, and it hits all these state standard curriculum items that teachers need to achieve anyways. And so now we're selling that across the country in the United States and in a few other countries as well, to help students learn about, you know, their interest in science and technology can have a real application and can have a real impact on people's lives. And the coolest part, I think, is we get to tie back what they're doing in the classroom to this real medical device that we're working with the FDA on, that's helping these amputees live a more fulfilling life. So they get to see what this application of technology might really look like in the real world.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think that you're working on a lot of really intriguing, leading edge ideas, and but I also appreciate the convergence and really simplifying your model, because as we all know, successful businesses have a core theme, and it's really neat to see that that's actually what BrainCo is doing. So let's actually kind of go back to basics and really from the beginning, because again, we are speaking to an ecosystem of businesses and startups and entrepreneurs and other people who are looking at repivoting or rethinking their businesses as well. What kind of advice would you give? And I'm just assuming, were you one of the founding members of BrainCo? If not, how did you kind of come on board? And tell us a little bit about some of the secret sauce of working with a really strong leadership group, and what it needs to happen, and what factors need to be part of the milieu or the attributes of the individuals to deal with these challenges. You know, being a startup, working with a whole series of things that larger companies may not need to have to worry about. What's that secret sauce? So were you one of the founders, and how did you get incorporated into the company?
So the founder, our CEO, his name is Bichang Han, and he was getting his PhD at the Harvard Center for Brain Science when he started BrainCo. And I think it was about a year after he founded the company. There was about 15 people in the company at that point that I had graduated from Harvard and was looking for different opportunities. And I was working in the leadership development space, and was planning on working with one of the leadership development companies that I had been in touch with during the application process earlier. And I also had this application out to this really interesting sounding job that was called neurofeedback research scientist, because my background had been in neuroscience and also in education. And I applied for the job and wasn't really sure about the trajectory if I went in that direction. But then I met the CEO, Bichang, and he is the most ambitious person I've ever met. And I really saw the vision for how big this company could be. And I talked with one of my friends, and he gave me some really good advice, which was those leadership development companies, they will be there next year, right? Those are established companies. This startup might take off. And if you don't like it next year, you can always go back to one of those leadership development companies and do what you're really interested in. But if this takes off, like, this is a really good opportunity. You should at least try. And I thought that made a lot of sense. And that was 4 years ago. And in that time, we've gone from 15 employees to 150 employees.
Wow.
With offices now in Boston and in China. So the opportunity was the right one to take.
That's fantastic. And, when the company got started, and I guess just looking at that accelerated growth, what would you sort of say were some of those core nuggets and the right things that your company did to be able to expand that rapidly? What were some of those choices and decisions that were done early on?
Yeah, I think it was focusing on a new core technology that people got excited about. So when you are trying to create this type of company, this really fast-growing, large company, you need to have something that has at least the potential to be game-changing. If you're trying to attract that type of investment, if you're trying to attract that type of talent, even if it's not, it's almost obvious that it's not guaranteed, right? If it was guaranteed, someone would have done it. So it may be high risk, but there's going to be a really high reward if you can pull it off. So having a really strong position on what the future could be like if we get this right, and having the right resources and the right people on the team to point to be able to say, this is our vision and these are the people that we have on the team and we can get it done. And showing that traction, month over month, year over year, to show that you are moving towards that goal. So the fast growing companies, the ones that we kind of think about, from Silicon Valley or things like this, I think the thing that they share is a really big vision that if we get this right, this is gonna change everything.
So you're really talking to the Simon Sinek golden circles, which is having people believe in your why, having that strong core tenet. I guess just, on that light about being in Silicon Valley and the competition for excellent people, workers, thinkers, how is that like working for you, being smaller than the big five, the Amazon, the Googles, the Facebooks? How were you able to attract the best people that believed in your vision?
Right. So if I were to tell you that you could have a job where you are going to be a key player in driving this new and changing technology that's already having a dramatic impact on people's lives, like amputees, elite level athletes, people who are learning, large education institutions, and you get to be responsible for taking this to the next step and be part of the team that gets to climb to the top of the mountain together. That is a very enticing, exciting opportunity. And similar to the advice that my friend gave me, the Amazon, the Googles, those are fantastic companies. They're likely to be there, but you are probably, depending on your seniority, not going to have the same type of position and responsibility that you would have in a startup. So there's almost some positioning, purposeful positioning away from the value or the attraction of what those companies offer, and more towards what a startup represents, which is excitement. It's a journey. It feels like I'm in Lord of the Rings and I have my team and we're like going through this journey. And at the end, there's this, massive goal of being able to help 1 million people and being able to look back on that. Like, that's going to be fantastic, right? We're kind of thinking about, what do we want our legacy to be as a team? And that feeling is really enticing for the right type of people. And there are certainly some type of people that rather have the other types of jobs. And there's certain types of people that are attracted to this adventure. So it's how you position yourself against the value proposition of those other companies. It's like selling, right? We're selling our company. We're selling our team. We're selling ourselves. And what we've been able to do is attract those types of people who see the vision, who want that adventure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's incredibly important bringing the right framed people into the philosophy of a company for its growth. In the early years, and potentially even now, is this a company that was originally bootstrapped? Did you actually go for venture funding? How did the company expand as rapidly as they did?
Yeah. So I missed the very first stage, which was bootstrapped by Bi Chung in an apartment in Alston, which is, I guess, a neighborhood in Boston, where people lived and worked. And then he was able to raise a little bit of money right before I joined. So I joined when they had already moved into the previous office that we were at, and we've since moved to a new office. But yeah, it was bootstrapped at first, and then through venture funding.
And how was that venture funding process? Do you recall that process? Was it a distraction from building the business? Because you hear this a lot from founders, that it becomes a distraction of building business versus raising funds to build the business. It ends up becoming kind of this oxymoronic situation.
Right.
Any pearls of wisdom to share on how to do that with the right balance?
Yeah. The interesting thing is, or let me say this first, Bi Chung is fantastic at his job. And part of his job as CEO is getting the right resources into the company. And he's fantastic at that. And then the balance component, I think, comes in for this point, which is, in order to raise the next round of funding, you need to be hitting certain business metrics. You need to be showing that growth. So it also kind of helps align certain business goals that the company has that we must reach in order to get to that next stage. So they can tie in together. My job in different fundraising rounds that we've done is to support Bi Chung and present on the side of the business that I'm responsible for, and talk about the expertise that me and my team are bringing to what we're doing in the United States. But Bi Chung is the real, as the CEO, of course, is the core figure, the core driver in those fundraising rounds.
That's fantastic. So you talked a lot about culture and about some of the ideas that you've been generating and bringing people in, which is really, really important. But as your company has been growing, and in the last 4 years has really been consolidating on the why, on your value proposition, and how you're going to stand out in the new normal, what has the challenges been for you with Me Too's, with other competitive products? We're based in Toronto. Many of us are here, where we have the Ariel Garten's Muse headset, and many others of similarity. Do you run into some issues around people doing those comparisons? Why is yours different? Is this just a Me Too? What is your competitive differentiation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So First Muse is a fantastic company. We've met them a couple times at some different conferences, and I really love what they're doing. In fact, I think their hardware is fantastic, and I like their product, their software on their app as well. It seems to me that their positioning is more about meditation, and they do a really good job at that. The job of any company in a similar space is to make sure that they carve out their particular area and how they're different from their competitors. So we would not say that Focus Calm is a meditation product. We use guided meditation as one component of what we deliver, but then we separate that with different types of biofeedback training to strengthen people's ability to enter into that state. That's separate from the guided meditation. And then we also have a really unique application of some technology that's been developed in Italy. There's a company called Formula Medicine. Formula Medicine is a group of MDs and PhDs, medical doctors and psychologists that provide the medical care for Formula One athletes and other elite level athletes. They also provide the cognitive training to these types of athletes. And what they've spent the last 20 or 30 years doing is coming up with this new concept, which they call mental economy training. So how can we be economical with our mental resources? You can imagine if you're a race car driver going 200 miles per hour down the track, that's a pretty intense experience. And to be able to do that for hours at a time, you need to be really economical with your mental resources. So they have come up with this cognitive training method to help people be what you might call energy efficient. How can I get more done with less cognitive resources? So they've done some fMRI studies to show the differences in elite level athletes versus novices, and that elite level athletes use way less cognitive resources to achieve similar tasks as novice athletes. And then they developed a training model to reinforce this. So that's one of the other aspects of this product. So we have the guided meditations so that people can learn what it feels like to be in this space and learn from these sports psychologists and other wellness experts and meditation teachers. We have a section where people can strengthen their ability to enter into this state through biofeedback training. Can I make the rocket ship fly by getting my mind into a calm place? And then this last portion where we realize that even with meditation, if you only meditate in your room, that's really nice. There's not a lot of distractions, especially if you're in a calm, quiet place, but your life in the world is not like that. So how can we challenge people to stay calm under pressure? That's what life is like. In business and relationships and anything, you need to be able to stay calm under pressure, just like the race car driver needs to stay calm under pressure. So this last component that we've developed, where we have people doing difficult cognitive tasks, but at the exact same time, they need to be lowering their anxiety, lowering their stress, so they can deal with these complex situations with as little mental effort as possible while still staying in that calm state. So imagine being able to not only learn and strengthen, but also challenge your ability to stay in these calm states. So our positioning is less about a meditation product, more about a wellness product that helps people lower their stress, helps people do this mental economy training so they can be more efficient with their energy throughout their day.
Yeah, I love it. I think the resilience training is brilliant, especially what we find ourselves in now. All of the political unrest, all of the issues around health and concern is very, very pivotal. Having just read a book called Mapping Cloud 9 by Steve Coulter, and a fairly old concept around flow, is what you're talking about is mathematical algorithms for flow, and flow being this idea around transient hypofrontalis and, like you said, mental economy. Is this some of the thinking there? And are those words that you're using to package and market what you are selling?
We're not using the word flow. It is close to that. Flow has, there's a researcher, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote that book on flow. And so he has a very, particular framework for what this is. And I'm not exactly sure it's the same thing. It's close to that though. So how can we challenge you to balance your stress and your relaxation with the mental challenge that we're giving you? So it's similar in a lot of ways. But I'm not at the point yet where we'd want to call it flow. We'd want to be doing more research and seeing what the biomarkers are of that particular state in order to call it flow outright. Though this idea of flow also kind of ties back to what we're talking about in education. So delivering people the right difficulty of training at the right time based on their mental strain also ties back to some of those underlying concepts of flow, where you want to balance challenge with overwhelm to make sure you're not too overwhelmed and you're not under challenged. So in some ways, this technology affords us the opportunity to apply some of those principles, both in education and in this type of mental training that we're delivering to individuals.
Yeah, we hear a lot of these days of the word hormesis and the various ways of using positive stress on making us more resilient. So I think it's a really interesting angle to what your algorithms do on the software. Talking about approvals and competitiveness and research, because again, that's kind of your forte. Have you right now? I'm assuming that this is a product that's being delivered and consumed and marketed directly to consumers. So they're doing this purchase based on their own interest and they're paying out of pocket. Has there been any decisions or discussions about doing more, robust phase 3 clinical studies on patients, comparing it to standard protocols or best in care, and then getting into the FDA system as a prescriptive digital therapeutic? Or what's the sort of the regulatory process that you're considering?
Mm-hmm. So our current stance on this is we're certainly going to be pursuing research studies with different companies. So one of our targets is workplace wellness. How can we help people be less stressed and get more done with less stress? So we're certainly going to be pursuing research studies with different companies to prove out the efficacy of this type of application, in addition to working with different sports teams and athletes to show the types of improvements that people can get from this type of training. And we do partner with universities to do different types of research studies, like I mentioned before with MIT. As it relates to an FDA, medical device application, as you know, it's a multi-year process, likely to cost a few $1 million to undertake. And our current perspective is there's a lot of people that we can help as it relates to stress and well-being that don't necessarily need to bring this into a medical device angle. Though I would say, looking into the future, we do see applications for specific indications. So right now, this is not a medical device. It doesn't treat any medical condition. It doesn't treat anxiety or depression. It just helps with stress, general wellness, and productivity. Though in China, we just launched an autism center to help people who have autism or have kids with autism do best practices around behavioral therapy. So we've hired therapists to give behavioral therapy and combine that with different types of biofeedback training to produce better relaxation. So we're starting to explore different applications of this technology for people with medical conditions. But right now there's no FDA approval there's nothing on the direct horizon for getting this as a medical device to treat any medical condition. We're keeping it as a general wellness device. But like I mentioned, I think it's pretty clear that you could see an application of this in the future for a specific medical population.
It'd be very interesting to see, just as we see all things evolving, sometimes slowly, sometimes very quickly. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that. It depends on which side of the silver lining you look at this since the COVID-19 pandemic. But it'd be very interesting to see if wellness ever becomes a clinical, something, that's listed on the DSM. I know we talk about positive psychology with Marty Seligman and, looking at the various virtue attributes and kind of creating a whole new panel of things to consider. Could wellness or stress actually have specific primary endpoints that could be studied? So this is really, I think, the interesting question behind products and software algorithms like companies like yourself are creating. So I guess we shall see. But on that note, there's a question that came in really around collaborations with pharma, the big players, the medical device companies that have a lot of money to play with, who right now, a lot of their business plans and their value propositions have to do with chemical entities. Some of them are starting to investigate digital prescriptives like you have. Have you considered anything around partnerships? Not only just for building the product and bringing it potentially into the foray and into a larger audience based on, like I said, can we create new norms around what these new clinical endpoints could look like in the next 5 to 10 years? What does that look like? Not only that, But somebody here has asked the question about developing tribes. Somebody is talking about the whole thing around tribes of neurofeedback, biofeedback, not just talking to the school of the acquired, or preaching to the choir, but really expanding this message in a much more mainstream way. What's your thoughts on how that can be done through partnerships or otherwise?
So I think everyone in the future, nearly everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, I think nearly everyone is going to have some sort of wellness practice, whether that's meditation, which we see taking off. Maybe people start to get into other types of traditions beyond meditation for different types of wellness practices. We saw that with yoga in the few decades before meditation. I think what we offer is a accessible way for people to get similar outcomes in a more scientific, quantifiable way. And our angle on it is, let's make this as engaging as possible. How can we make this something that I would consider fun? And the reasoning is, we know this works. If you can quantifiably get your mind into a state of calm or a state of focus, that's going to help you achieve your goals, if your goals are to reduce your stress. If we can make it fun and engaging, people are more likely to work with this product. And the more they do so, the more benefits they're going to get. So our angle on this, as it relates to tribes and the social component, is what types of features could we possibly build that would get people to connect with other people? Because we know the social component is a really key ingredient if you want to make something really engaging or really sticky. So what types of social features, how can we connect people? Could you put this headband on and then it would immediately connect you with other people in the world doing similar training? Could you be working together to make the rocket ship fly? Or we have this interesting partnership with this company that builds interactive art pieces in the world, in the real world, physical art pieces. And so can we use this type of technology to interface with interactive art pieces? How do we create a network of people that are engaging with each other and with the world using their brains, and all the while they're improving their wellness outcomes? So I really see this technology as a way for us to connect people around the world using their brain activity to interact with the world, and at the exact same time they're improving their wellness. That's the vision for this product.
I really love it. There is another practical question, but it does speak to what you just said here. So I think a lot of us are probably wondering about the mechanics, the science, or the algorithm associated with what's going on with the neural activity and how we're making something physical change with the output. So for example, the DEXA prosthetic, okay, for the amputees, there's something going on in the brain that's making something function.
Yes.
And then you're also talking about this idea, and now especially in health, when we're talking about telemedicine, we're talking about interactive art development, or whatever else you're doing about that's being done in sort of a distant way. How are we going to merge things telepathically using our brainwaves? I think ultimately a lot of people are wondering how that would work.
Yeah. So as a kid, all I wanted to do was develop like magic powers. Like my dad told me some story about Icarus and Daedalus, he was an inventor in ancient Greece who built these wings so he could fly. And he did that because he was an inventor. And I think even my interest in meditation practices were around what's accessible, what type of experiences are possible through developing oneself. And the technology that we've developed is an extension of that. And the way it works is almost like a light switch would be the easiest analogy. When you flick a light switch, you turn it from on to off, the light goes on and off. The way that the headband works is it's detecting the electrical activity that your brain is naturally producing. You could imagine that while you're asleep, your brain activity looks pretty different than while you're awake, or comparing when you're really relaxed versus when you're really hyper, really engaged. Your brain is firing at different frequencies. So we pick up those signatures and we use those signatures like a light switch to turn things on and off. So that's the way that you could interact with the art installation or with the biofeedback training. When we see your brain, when we see the signature of relaxation, then you start to win the game. You get that positive reinforcement. And the same thing works with the prosthetics. So when an amputee has lost part of their arm, we'd call it a transradial amputation. this part of their arm right here is still intact. And so instead of putting sensors on the brain, the sensors go on their arm. And when we see them moving when they're sending impulses to their muscles to move their fingers, we can code that particular muscle signal to make them point the robotic hand. So we'll have like a software, and the software will say, please think about pointing your index finger while they have the sensors on. And we record what that looks like from right here. Please think about making a fist. And then we record that specific signature that we're seeing. And we'll do that for about 15 minutes. And then after 15 minutes, this personalized model is generated where the sensors can understand, oh, right, that's the same signature that we did during learning for pointing the finger. I'm going to make the robotic hand point the finger, so on and so forth. So by understanding what certain signatures looking like, we can tell when someone is in that state or when they want to move something, and then that triggers a reaction in the outside world.
So you're obviously going to be collecting a lot of data in this process. Let's just say theoretically, you know, thousands and maybe eventually hundreds of thousands of people are using these technologies, and we start creating these data lakes. Mm-hmm. What is your plans around this data? What do you think it can be used for? Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of this equation, the big overarching kind of nemesis for everybody mm-hmm. is what kinds of conversations are you having around privacy, security, data ownership versus giving data away? What's your take on all of that discussion?
So this is something that we've heavily invested in, both our resources and our time. And we started this conversation like years ago before we had any real applications out in the market. We work with a few different organizations. One is called Data Ethics that has been helping us over the past year and a half or almost 2 years now form our data privacy team that's internal at Brainco that meets every single week to talk about these issues. So from the software developer to the salesperson to the marketing person, everyone is part of this conversation. In fact, we just did a training last week or the week before with the whole office, a refresher training on data privacy and security best practices. So we're always thinking about this. And from a business angle, it's actually a competitive advantage. So we are GDPR ready to work with the companies in the EU. Our advisors at Data Ethics are working with us constantly, multiple times per week, to make sure that we're taking all these different things into consideration. And the general premise of the GDPR principles are right to know. So every user has the right to know what data is being collected. Right to access. So they have a right to see whatever data we have in a really easily digestible way. And they also have a right to be forgotten. So if they send us a request that they don't want us to have any of their data anymore, poof, we get rid of it. The other principle that we operate on is privacy by design. So we're only collecting data that's necessary for the products to do their function. We're not collecting any data that's extraneous for any of our purposes. And we also don't sell any data. We're not interested in that. That doesn't serve us. And the other thing that's more about optics is people assume that if we had thousands of users using this, we're going to be able to develop these like amazing algorithms from all these thousands of users. And the truth is, for machine learning to work well, you don't need thousands and thousands of users. You need a smaller sample of really high quality data. And the way that you get high quality data is in controlled, kind of like laboratory environments where the researcher or the data collector is really understanding what exactly is happening. Because if I say, oh, everyone using this meditation must be relaxed while they're doing it, even though I can't see them, they're halfway across the world, and we use that data for our algorithm, maybe they weren't relaxed during that meditation. Maybe they normally are, but they weren't during that particular meditation. And therefore, that data would actually skew the algorithms. So in terms of like this big data analysis, it's not much more than what normal apps would do, because the real core algorithm development happens in a much more controlled setting. And on top of that, like I was just mentioning, we put a lot of effort, and we're pretty heavy on the data privacy. We are really heavy on the data privacy and security component.
Fantastic. Lots and lots of stuff there, and fascinating. Sounds like a constantly evolving idea, development of the company, of the product, of the algorithm. Sounds very exciting, and actually really looking forward to hearing about the next breakthrough and the big announcement that you're going to have. So I'm sure that you are going to do extremely well. excited about where potentially AI and other things are as we start to, develop this internationally. So we are coming close to the top of the hour. I have actually sort of paraphrased some of the questions that have come through. So I do want to spend some time thanking you for taking the time to speaking with us about the adventures of BrainCo and all of the great elements and the great things that you're putting out there to consumers, especially during this very, very difficult time. So thank you. Thanks to all of the people who are attending today. I just want to let you know that I will be sending an email with a link to this webinar if you'd like to look at it again, or send it to anybody who's interested. We also want to let you know that there'll be links to Max if anybody would like to get in touch with him or with his company. So thank you again for your time, and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.
Thanks, Natalie. Really appreciate it.